Alright, this is Ms. Schneider, and right now we're going to do a video that is going to teach us how to do factoring, which is what you've been working on with tiles, and then we started to build into it with generic rectangles, and we're going to sort of make that process more efficient of factoring and turning our sums into products. So before we get into that, I want you to try this warm-up. I'm going to have you pause, and then you're going to answer the question of what is the product that goes with the sum of the generic rectangle below. So you're going to fill in 2 sets of parentheses, and then when you're ready, go ahead and start the video again. We'll check what you did. Alright, so inside your parentheses, you should have 5x minus 2. Let me go ahead and write that in. 5x minus 2, and then 2x minus 7. That should be the sides of the generic rectangle that you came up with. Now there's a couple things that I want to review and point out while we're sitting in this spot. So starting with number 1, what we talked about as the end of the pattern in the Google Doc right before this video was that those 2 diagonals have the same product. If I multiply here 10x squared and 14, I get 140x squared, and if I multiply negative 35x and negative 4x, I get 140x squared. And so we get that same product, which is what this says here. The other thing that I would like to point out, so that's going to be important in just a minute, the other thing that I want to point out is that we always, when we're kind of setting these up, want to make sure that we start to put the same terms in the same spot in our generic rectangle. Here's what I mean. You're going to notice that when I do a generic rectangle, I always end up with my x squareds in this bottom left box. My constant always ends up right here, and then this diagonal is always the 2x terms that we end up combining to get our 1x term in our sum. So those are all important for what we're going to do where we set up factoring in just a minute here, okay? So hopefully you ended up with that warm-up correct, and we're going to move on. So right underneath that, we're going to do some exploring on factoring, and we're going to start to put some things together to see if we can do factoring with a generic rectangle instead of using tiles. So we're going to do this example. Go ahead and write that down. 2x squared plus 5x plus 3. And we're going to just build our generic rectangle. Now, I mentioned in the last slide how our x squareds always end up in this bottom left box. So we're going to start by putting our x squared term right in there. So go ahead and do that. And our constant terms always end up in this box. So I put the 3 from my problem down into that box. Now, using these 2 empty boxes, we would always combine those to end up with 5x. So the problem here is I don't know if I should put in those 2 boxes. I don't know if I should do 1x and 4x to get my 5x, or if I should do 2x and 3x, and maybe that gives me 5x, or if it's 0x and 5x. So I'm not sure what combination of things to put in those 2 boxes. So part of the tough part of the factoring process is we have to figure that out. What's going to make this work? And so let's talk about what we know so far. So we know that whatever is in those 2 boxes, the sum of those 2 things has to be 5x, because we know that when we combine them, we have to end up with 5x there. The other thing that we know is that the diagonals multiply to the same thing. So I know that these 2 boxes have to multiply to 6x squared because that's what 2x squared times 3 is. So the product that I'm looking for is 6x squared. Now, I told you way back at the beginning of the year that finally this year you're going to get to learn why you've been doing diamond problems for so long, and it's finally here. It's very exciting. So we're going to set up a diamond, and we're going to put the product on the top and the sum on the bottom. And so this is a problem that you've seen many, many times before, where you have a 6x squared on the top and a 5x on the bottom, and you're looking for 2 things that you need that multiply to 6x squared and add to 5x. So you're probably already in your head yelling at me that you want me to put a 2x and a 3x in there. So I'm going to do that. Once I figure out that that's 2x and 3x, then I'm going to fill those in my generic rectangle, because those are the 2 that I want to actually add up to the 5x. I want to use 2 and 3, not 1 and 4 or 0 and 5. It doesn't matter which one I put in which box, so I can do that in either order. Once I have that, then the only thing that's left is I have to fill in the outsides of my generic rectangle to get my base and my height for my product. So what I want to do is I want to put 2x on this side and x on this side so that the 2x can go nicely into this column. Okay, so I'm going to fill that in. I put 2x and x. And that means that this right here has to be a 3, because 3 times x is going to give me that 3x. And up here, this has to be a 1, because 1 times 2x is going to give me 2x, okay? So I can figure out now that my sum is equal to my base of 2x plus 3 times my height of x plus 1, and we just factored. Okay? I know that's kind of a lot, so we're going to practice that a couple more times together, and then you're going to get all sorts of practice on your own. So what I want you to do is turn to your notes. So take a minute, pause, get your notes to the right spot, and get ready to do some Cornell notes on factoring. All right, hopefully you are with me. You are flipped to a new page in your notes, and our objective is I can factor a quadratic expression. That's what I'm headed towards. I want to be able to do that. So we're going to start with just an example. You've seen it happen once already. So go ahead and put an example of, we are going to factor 3x squared plus 10x plus 8. Okay, and we're going to do it the same way we just did. So draw that generic rectangle, and we're going to fill in our constant and our x squared. So we're going to start by putting 3x squared down here on the bottom left from up here, and we're going to put 8 up on the top right from right there. Okay? I'm immediately going to figure out what it is that I need to fill in these two boxes. So I know that the sum has to be 10x. Whatever that middle x term is what these two boxes have to add up to, and the product is the same as this. So 3x squared times 8 is 24x squared. So that's what I know. Now let's set up our diamond problem. So I put 24x squared on top and 10x on the bottom. Take a second to think to yourself, what two terms would multiply to 24 and add to 10? And it is going to be 6x and 4x. So that's what goes on the side of my diamonds, and I go ahead and I put those into my generic rectangle. Okay? From here, we're going to fill in the outsides of the box. So I'm asking myself, okay, what two things multiply to 3x squared? Well, it's going to be 3x and x. I want to put 3x on the side here because that's going to go real nicely into this row, and it wouldn't go nicely into this column. Okay, so you're going to see me fill in 3x and x, and then I know that I have to put a 2 there to get that 6x, and x times 4 gives me 4x. I check to make sure 4 times 2, yep, that's 8, and that matches. So the factored form of the quadratic expression I started with is x plus 2 times 3x plus 4. That's my base times my height there. Okay? Let's do one more example to make sure we've all got it. So underneath that, let's factor 6x squared plus 17x plus 12. And we're just going to set it up, same as always. So our x squared term goes down on the bottom left. Our constant goes up on the top right. And then I figure out, okay, what's going to be the product and what's going to be the sum. Okay, so I'm looking at the problem, and I know that whatever I put in these two boxes has to add up to 17x. So that's going to go on the bottom, and then I multiply 6x squared times 12, and that's my product on the top. So I get 17x and 72x squared. Now these are big numbers, but you don't have that many choices for things that multiply to 72. So I want you to think about it. Pause and think for a minute what will go on the side of that diamond. Alright, you figured out it was 9x and 8x that multiply to 17 and add to 72. Backwards, that add to 17 and multiply to 72. So I put those into the generic rectangle, and then we fill in the outsides. So to multiply to 6x squared, I'm going to use 3 and 2, and the 3 is going to go real nice into this column. So we're going to put the 3 down here and the 2x over there. Okay, so 3x and 2x, and then I know that 2x times 4 gives me 8x, and 3x times 3 gives me 9x. I check to see, yep, 4 times 3, that's 12. Okay, so I write out my base times height, which is 3x plus 4 times 2x plus 3. Okay, now I'm going to have you try a couple examples on your own with some work that you can check before you move on to your individual practice that's going to be scored and sent to you. Okay, so, before we do that, let's do a summary. So go ahead and draw a line, and let's do a summary. Okay, so your steps to factor is you're going to start with a quadratic expression that looks like this. Okay, you're going to immediately put your x squareds, whatever they are, down in this part of the rectangle. You're going to put your constant, that's c, up in the upper right side. Okay, so go ahead and draw that generic rectangle so you have that visual for you to look back at. Then you make your diamond, and you multiply the two things, that ax squared times c, you multiply those to put on top, and whatever that x term in the middle of the quadratic expression is, that's your sum on the bottom of the diamond. Okay, once you have that setup all done, you solve your diamond problem, look at the sides, and you put those back in the generic rectangle. So you put your diamond answers into your rectangle. That's step 4. Okay, then you find the outsides, the factors that go on the base and the height of your rectangle. Then you just write your final answer. Okay, at this point you might need to take a second to pause to finish those steps, but make sure you have that. Alright, now we're going to do some problems that you have to try. So I'm going to have you pause. It's going to ask you to fill in your answer for what you think the factored form of x squared plus 9x plus 18 is, and then you're going to watch to make sure that you ended up with the right answer. Okay? So take a second to pause and work that out. Alright. Let's check out what you did. So real quick, you're going to see this answer worked out, and you should have ended up with x plus 3 and x plus 6 as your two factors. Okay, if you didn't, take a second to look at maybe where you made a mistake. Was it in the numbers that you picked over here? Was it in the way that you filled out your generic rectangle? What was it that gave you a mistake? So make sure that you find that before you move on to the last example. Alright, and last, go ahead and find the factored form of this one. Be careful with that negative. Okay, that's going to change your diamond problem up just a little bit. But go ahead and pause and try and figure this one out. Alright, and let's check to see if you got the right factored form and how you got there. I needed to multiply this time to negative 60x squared and add to 17. So I needed 20x and negative 3x as my two factors. Okay, once I put those back in, I ended up with a base of x plus 5 and a height of 4x minus 3. Alright, now go ahead and go to your Google form and do some practice on your own.